You're watching Caucasus Now. I'm Orkan Amashov. Diplomacy, we are told, is the art of the possible, and at times it is an informal encounter that paves the way for formal outcomes. On the 16th of May, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev and Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan held an informal exchange on the sidelines of the 6th summit of the European political community. Although we're not privy to the content of their impromptu conversation, we can still make an effort to analyse its importance and potential implications. Let's try to understand.
When the idea of the European Political Community, EPC, was first proposed in May 2022, just months into the war in Ukraine, it appeared as an attempt to build a broader continental forum capable of addressing strategic and security challenges. Distinct from both the European Union and the Council of Europe, the EPC lacks a formal institutional structure and has yet to establish its true place in Europe's institutional architecture. Seen by many as a response to the geopolitical tremors caused by the Ukraine war, the EPC also aspires to bring together the EU's 27 member states and non-EU European countries as part of a wider policy coordination framework. Some observers argue that the EPC reflects the limits of the European Union's ability to fulfill broader integrationist goals, suggesting that a genuine Eurocentric vision requires mobilizing the cumulative geopolitical clout of the entire continent. For the countries of the South Caucasus, participation in the EPC seems to align comfortably with their interests. All three states maintain varying degrees of delicacy in their relations with Moscow and have not sought to join the anti-Russian Western Bloc to the detriment of their priorities. Azerbaijan, whose foreign policy places a strong emphasis on equidistance from major geopolitical centers of power, views the EPC as part of its long-standing association with European institutions. This position is reinforced by Baku's firm support for Ukraine's territorial integrity and its emphasis on strategic autonomy, with Europe seen as a balancing force vis-à-vis other geopolitical centers. Georgia, formally committed to EU membership, sees the EPC as a natural forum. Alongside Baku, Tbilisi has helped establish critical infrastructure corridors linking the South Caucasus with Europe, diminishing Russia's grip over the region. Armenia's case is more complex. Although a member of Russian-led organizations such as the Eurasian Economic Union and the CSTO, it has tried to project an image of European aspiration, with the EPC offering a platform for public diplomacy. In addition, the European political community has also provided a platform for Baku and Yerevan to engage in meaningful discussions. Notably, it was at the inaugural EPC summit in Prague on the 6th of October 2022 that Azerbaijan and Armenia agreed to recognize each other's territorial integrity, a breakthrough that drew public criticism from President Putin for Armenia's formal acknowledgement of Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. And now, at the 6th EPC summit held in Tirana, Albania, President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan met again. No announcement has followed, and no breakthrough was expected. Yet, the connection between the attainment of a durable peace between Azerbaijan and Armenia and the future of this region's interaction with Europe remains as strong as ever.
To discuss the 6th EPC summit, its significance for the South Caucasus, and of course, the impromptu exchange between President Ilham Aliyev and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan, joined by high-ranking officials from both sides, I'm pleased to welcome two highly respected guests. Joining us from Yerevan is Boris Novosadian, a seasoned commentator on Armenia's foreign policy-related matters and also on the wider regional issues. Welcome. And also Tabib Seinov, joining us from Baku, commentator, political analyst, with a particular focus on Caucasus dynamics and also Ukraine-related matters. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you for inviting.
Thank you very much indeed. Boris, I would like to begin our conversation with a broader subject. Before talking about that meaty part, which is going to be about President Aliyev's impromptu meeting with Prime Minister Pashinyan, allow me to pose a broader question. What does the presence of the leaders of Caucasian countries at the EPC signify in the context of this region's relationship with Europe, and also particularly against the backdrop of the ongoing war in Ukraine?
Europe is a very interesting player for our reason, and not for its actual politics, which is quite contradictory, I would say, or controversial, and not very much effective. But if we take the history of Europe and European Union, we can see that this is probably the best model in the history of humankind of civilized relations between the states. It is a place where social solidarity was implemented in practice, at least in many countries, members of the European Union. And also the protection of individual freedoms is on the highest level, maybe in the history of humankind again. But the practical influence of EU and Europe in general to the international politics is currently decreased because probably that Europe did not pay enough attention to the security issues. And given that security issues are now dominating in the international relations, it does not have sufficient resources to influence international politics. And now we see that Europe is just following the initiatives coming from United States. But still, the model that was created and was effectively implemented in Europe, at least until maybe period before 20-25 years from now, is a good example for all Caucasus nations to follow it, but taking into account real politics and security challenges that are now. So I think Europe and our countries should take lessons from the previous period and come to new model of relations between us in the region and between us and the other world. And meetings in the European political community, I think, allow to combine the best historical practices and current challenges that the world faces. So I think these meetings are very useful, although we had successes. You mentioned Prague meeting, the first one. You did not mention Granada meeting, where, in fact, Azerbaijan decided not to participate. And we can mention also London meeting, when Armenia rejected to take part in a separate meeting initiated by British Prime Minister. And current meeting, I think, promises that there will be interesting discussions and there will be interesting formats for Armenia and Azerbaijan to come closer to the peace agreement.
Yes, indeed, yeah. We vividly remember that President Aliyev did not participate at the Granada meeting, which was the third, I think, summit of the European political community. There was an attempt to organize a meeting between two leaders in London in August 2024 during their fourth summit. Nothing eventuated from that particular proposition. I don't think President Aliyev was present in Hungary. I think it was just a week before COP29. He was very busy. And at the sixth summit, they eventually met. We don't know the content of that conversation. We will try to sort of interpret its meaning and implications. Tabib, your recent academic paper titled Azerbaijan's Quest for Strategic Autonomy argues that, in particular after September 2023, Azerbaijan has been following a more assertive foreign policy. Within this foreign policy, Rusif Hussein, for example, one of your colleagues, always likes to use the term equidistance, so being in a position wherein you're never part of any particular bloc, but you always have maintained good balanced relations with all of them. What is the place of EPC, European Political Community, which is an evolving structure, in that mindset of Azerbaijan, you think?
Well, Azerbaijan has multiple identities. Azerbaijan, by the virtue of its geographic location at the crossroads of north and south, east and west, it's both a European country and also part of the broader Middle East and part of the broader Central Asia, you can say, or Central Eurasia, being part of the Turkic world. So in that regard, Azerbaijan's participation in EPC is simply a manifestation of its European identity. It's part of the European continent, and it will play an active role in shaping the future of the European continent, along with other countries, 47 nations that form the EPC. And also, we need to basically say that EPC is a manifestation of the new reality in the world, in the European continent, and the manifestation of an understanding that Europe is bigger than the European Union, basically, the future of European continent needs to be shaped not only by the European Union member state, but also by the countries that are not part, at least currently, are not part of the European Union and have no strategic objective at the moment to be part of the European Union, just like, for example, Azerbaijan said. And Azerbaijan's foreign policy is, as you mentioned in that paper I wrote some time ago, is that Azerbaijan wants to participate in international organizations, international forums, and international dealings in which it is an equal partner, in which there is no hierarchical relations between Azerbaijan and its vis-a-vis. And EPC is one of these forums. It's not an organization. It doesn't have a clear vision. It doesn't have a secretariat, but it's a very useful forum for Azerbaijan, for Azerbaijani leadership and diplomats to attend, to exchange views on the future of the continent, of which Azerbaijan forms part of, and basically, to try to play a constructive role in shaping of the future of the continent, along with other 46 nation states.
Thank you, Tabib. Now let's talk about the meaty part of that EPC summit from our perspective, from the Caucasian perspective, of course, that impromptu meeting. Well, it appeared to be impromptu. I don't know whether it was organized in advance or not, but it appeared to be a completely ad hoc meeting between President Aliyev and Prime Minister Pashinyan involving the members of their delegations. Boris, so what do you think they have discussed? We can, of course, make an effort to guess that they discussed the peace treaty negotiation and so forth. But the impression given is that, in particular, bearing in mind the interview given by Prime Minister Pashinyan to Azerbaijani public TV, that they have discussed the matters of mutual interest, and they fundamentally, at this stage, agreed to disagree for the time being. That's the sort of a sensibility dominating Azerbaijani media landscape. What is the feeling about this subject in Yerevan?
I don't think that there is something very, I would say, concrete in the analysis that we can follow in Armenian media about the meeting. But generally, the impression among the public and among media actors is quite positive. And it is quite clear that, indeed, as you say, Aliyev and Pashinyan were discussing the possibility of signing a peace treaty. Because we, of course, see that if not pressure, then at least attempt to convince the sides that the peace treaty should be signed as soon as possible and not to be connected with any prerequisites which create artificial, and I mentioned this several times in talking with you, artificial obstacles for signing it, because indeed all remaining things that are not agreed between Baku and Yerevan are not substantial. It's my conviction, and I think the practice will prove that. And since there are a lot of opportunities opening before Yerevan and Baku in terms of international initiatives and implementation of ambitious projects, economic, energetic, and political. I think overcoming these controversies that still exist between Yerevan and Baku is very much important. This opens windows for both countries to go ahead and not to be limited to those artificial borders, be it mental borders, political or real, in the region, and try to put in practice all those great ideas that are being discussed in the region and in a broader world. It was also a good chance in this meeting that the central issue was not Ukraine, because we understand that if this European political community gathers, then Ukraine is in the center of attention. But by chance, the main discussions about the Ukrainian problem was taking place in Istanbul the same days. And this, I think, allowed participants of the Summit of European Political Community to focus on other issues. And one of these issues was Armenian-Azerbaijani still persisting conflict. And there was, I guess, big attention from other European leaders to talk to Aliyev and Pashinyan and to try to convince them again to be faster in their negotiations.
Tabib, Boris a couple of times during our interviews described what Azerbaijan calls constitutional obstacle being artificial, sort of mental obstacle, and that's the Armenian position, of course. And Prime Minister Pashinyan during his interview said that technically, from the legal point of view, there is no such an obstacle. He referred to the certain provision of the Agreement on Peace and Interstate Normalization, in line with which no state will be able to refer to his local domestic legislation in order to obviate its international obligations. So effectively, the argument which seems to dominate Armenian foreign policy community is that there is no real obstacle. What do you make of that, number one? And number two, impression given is that, it's only impression of course, that Armenian leadership is ready to do anything but change that constitution by means of referendum. And what else do you think the Prime Minister Pashinyan should or could do to show the sincerity of his government's intention in terms of concluding a peace deal with Azerbaijan?
I think this is one of the most important and vitally important questions that Armenian-Azerbaijani peace process is facing right now. Sometimes it seems that Prime Minister Pashinyan is alluding or implying that Azerbaijan's concerns may not be genuine, and that nothing can be further from the truth. If you look at the history of Armenian-Azerbaijani relations, if you look at the legislative acts of Armenia, not just the preamble with which Azerbaijan has a fundamental problem, but multiple legislative acts. And if you would look at Azerbaijani officials, including at the presidential level, statements over the recent years, there has been a consistency in Azerbaijani statements, which very much reveal that this is a fundamental problem that Azerbaijan considers, fundamental obstacle that Azerbaijan is worried about, and the longer time passes, that obstacle may become even more difficult to overcome in the future. It is important, again, to mention that we have a recent history. We have, when Prime Minister Pashinyan says that when the Constitutional Court approves the draft peace treaty, once the peace treaty is signed, the Constitutional Court of Armenia, according to their legislation, needs to approve it. And once that takes place, as Prime Minister Pashinyan says, the problem will be solved. However, we have a recent history of similar ambiguous decisions by Armenian Constitutional Court. We have the September 24 decision of the Armenian Constitutional Court, which nominally paved the way for the delimitation process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but left a lot of questions in the way, in its legal rationale, in the way it interpreted some of the legislative nuances in the Armenian domestic legislation, including the linkage between the Declaration of Independence of Armenia and the Constitution's preamble. We don't have maybe time to delve into the technicalities of it, but those ambiguities are very much real, and they create a question, they put a question mark on the sincerity of the Armenian political establishment to unambiguously recognize the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan. And we also have 2010, January 2010 decision of the Constitutional Court on the tourist protocols between Turkey and Armenia, which basically left also the Turkish counterparts in surprise because of its ambiguities, because of the ambiguities that were present in this ruling. And as a result, basically, that Zurich protocols were never ratified, neither by Turkey nor by Armenia. We should avoid, Armenia and Azerbaijan should not fall in the same trap as the Zurich protocols. Armenian and Azerbaijani draft peace treaty is a historical achievement, and we need to make sure that that treaty gets signed and approved without any legal ambiguities. This is important for the peace between our nations for generations to come. And that's very important that we do not repeat the same mistakes that Armenia and Turkey, or rather Armenia, I should say, have made in its 2010 Constitutional Court decision.
Boris, you made your position very clear about this constitutional obstacle subject, and on a number of occasions, of course. So what Tabib describes as a legal ambiguity, probably from your perspective, is a contrived problem. I perfectly understand your logic there, and I perfectly understand Tabib's logic, of course, and that's the crux of the problem between Azerbaijan and Armenia at this juncture. But there's one question in relation to which I would be most grateful if you could provide an answer. What Azerbaijani analysts are saying that Armenia's sincerity is always to be doubted because, let's talk about 1991 Almaty Declaration. We remember Armenian leaders, former leaders, Kocharyan, Sarkisyan, and even at a certain stage, Pashinyan, Prime Minister, current Prime Minister himself, saying that, yes, indeed, we have absolutely no problem in terms of recognizing Azerbaijan's territorial integrity in line with 1991 Almaty Declaration, but that declaration has nothing to do with the Karabakh region, back then the former Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. So that adds to the sense amongst the analysts here is that Armenia is currently in the person of the Prime Minister Pashinyan, is forced to say what he's saying now, but if the circumstances on the ground change, Armenia will utilize the first opportunity. What do you make of this conjecture, which seems to pervade in the minds of many analysts in this country when they articulate why they're concerned about Armenia's current constitution?
I will first allow myself to make, if not correction, then some comments to the statements of you, Orhan, and Tabib. The first one is that I was, in fact, announcing Armenian position. I was not announcing Armenian position. I was announcing my personal position,
yes, of course,
which differs in many cases from the position of Nikol Pashinyan. And I have to remind that probably the first loud statement about problems in Armenian constitution was made by Nikol Pashinyan himself in his interview in January 2024 to public radio of Armenia. And only later, this problem with the constitution became a prerequisite for the signing of peace treaty. Second is about Armenian-Turkish protocols. I don't see any ambiguity there, and the document is valuable for me until now because it was disconnecting historical problems between the countries and actual practical relations between the neighbors. And it was perfect opportunity for both states to improve relations between each other and to change the whole atmosphere in the region, including Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. And the reason for not ratifying the protocols was not ambiguity, but pressure from Baku to Ankara not to make this step. And now answering, and one more, there is no legal act in Armenia no single legal act in Armenia that is recognizing Karabakh as part, Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Armenia. So this kind of, I would say, making mistakes about the legal system of Armenia is one of the artificial.
With the greatest possible respect, but if I may just very briefly ask you, it's the opportune time. What's about that Parliamentary Act of 1992 adopted in July, in line with which Armenia cannot recognize Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan? Is that part of the legal system there? Can that be rectified now in order to give confidence to Azerbaijan that Armenia is very sincere?
We perfectly know that any statement and any document adopted by Parliament could be changed with another document. So if Armenian Parliament ratifies a peace treaty between Armenia and Azerbaijan, then all previous decisions will lose their essence. But I was talking about when I was talking about legal system, I meant the laws adopted in Armenia. And I several times brought examples of different legislative acts that are not recognizing Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Armenia, including several editions of the law on territorial administration and territorial division of Armenia. Never any square millimeter of Karabakh territory was recognized there as part of the Republic of Armenia. And different statements by our diplomats and maybe politicians about preamble of the constitution as an obstacle for recognizing territorial integrity of Azerbaijan, including Nagorno-Karabakh, we should not confuse negotiation positions with real practical and technical and legal obstacles. And I think now as well, we are facing this. Negotiation position is becoming an obstacle for recognizing legal realities. And I'm calling to our colleagues in Azerbaijan not confuse these things again, and not to, making so strong in the public perception the non-existent problem. I think during recent months, this was done several times. And I perfectly understand Azerbaijani public that is now convinced through several statements by Azerbaijani officials and experts that there is no way that this treaty could be signed without changes in Armenian constitution. This is also what I mean saying mental obstacles preventing us from clear legal steps.
I perfectly understand your argument, Boris. Also, we distinguish between two distinct possibilities. One is Armenia not recognizing, Armenia viewing Karabakh as part of Armenia, but it's a Miatsuma ideology. One is Armenia not recognizing Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan. It's a completely different possibility. So you're kind of distinguishing between these two things and saying that your problem is related to this one. It's not a big deal, but this one would be sorted out once we ratify the deal. Very similar to the logic of Prime Minister Pashinyan, which is not accepted in this country. But it's very, very important that we understand in a very clear way what you say, which is incredibly important for us and for the evolution of our perception of what the prevailing sensibility in Armenia. Sorry, you wanted to add something, or was it me just?
Yes, and I just want to repeat my suggestion that I've made several times. If still this kind of doubts exist, then Armenia and Azerbaijan would agree on a composition of, let's say, expert commission, a specialist in constitutional law, from different countries, those who will be respected and recognized by Baku and Yerevan, and ask them whether constitutions of Armenia and Azerbaijan create obstacles for the recognition of the territorial integrity of each other. This will be probably the best solution, because this kind of independent commission will not, its decision or its opinion will not have any obligatory or mandatory meaning from both countries. But this will be a clear message to our societies that we should not be concerned with the constitutions of each other if we recognize territorial integrity of each other, make it as a basic part of peace treaty, and this peace treaty should be recognized as compliant to the constitution by constitutional courts in both countries and the parliament, and ratified by the parliament. I think this is the most practical, and this is most visible solution of the problem that could be reached. And I am sure that this expert commission will say that there are no obstacles in both constitutions for recognition of territorial integrity of each other.
Tabib, it looks like that, I think that Azerbaijan is not going to retract its demand. The constitutional demand will remain there, but we're trying to understand the Armenian position, of course. There has been an argument put forward by Prime Minister Pashinyan and his members of his government that Armenian constitution, what they say sounds like this. Our constitution, Armenian constitution, does not have any territorial pretension towards Azerbaijan. And if there is anything there, it will be properly sorted out. This will be ratified. Constitutional Court will express its opinion, and that problem will be sorted out. And secondly, they say there are certain problems associated with Azerbaijani constitution, which has territorial claims towards Armenia, but we do not view it as an obstacle. That's what Prime Minister Pashinyan said whilst addressing UN, I remember last year, just before November COP29. And again, he's saying the self-same. Boris actually believes that both constitutions are kosher. There's no problem with both of them. What do you make of that equivalence that Armenia has been trying to create between the two constitutions?
First of all, I want to say that just like Boris, I am not an official. I'm not representing an official position, and that allows me basically to express, just like Boris, my own personal analysis and views. I think that it's important really to have a conversation that is open, that is not trying to sweep under the carpet the problems that are real, and the concerns need to be heard from both sides. That's the only way to move forward with this peace process. Specifically on your question, Orhan, I mean, we need to understand that this problem, the constitutional problem, is not going to go anywhere. It will remain, and it will be a headache for both leaders and for both countries as long as it's not resolved. Boris mentioned that the protocols had no ambiguities. Let me actually, I just opened up, let me just read one small excerpt from the decision of the Armenian Constitutional Court in 2010. I want to say that nobody denies that Azerbaijan had a role in preventing Turkey from moving forward with the Armenia normalization at the time. That may be true, but that doesn't mean that there were very real problems between the two countries. And Armenia never ratified this agreement either. So let me read the excerpt from that decision. The court ruled that the provisions of the protocols, that's the 2010 Constitutional Court decision, the court ruled that the provisions of the protocols cannot be interpreted, that's a quote, cannot be interpreted or applied in a way that would contradict the provisions of the preamble to the Armenian Constitution and the requirements of the paragraph 11 of the Declaration of Independence of Armenia. Paragraph 11 of the Independence of Armenia is the one that refers to Western Armenia, one, and the second, it refers to the so-called Miatsum Declaration of 1989. So how are we supposed to believe that this is not a problem when the Constitutional Court itself said time and again that it actually attributes a legal weight to that declaration of independence. So that's a problem. And also, how do we then interpret the Constitutional Court's decisions in 98 and 2003, certifying the election of Robert Kocharyan as president of Armenia, despite the fact that he should have, normally the Constitutional Court should have ruled that election illegal because Robert Kocharyan did not have a 10-year residency record in Armenia per se, in Armenia itself. He moved to Armenia in 1997 and did not have the 10-year residency in Armenia at the time of his election, both times, by the way. So he was elected based on an understanding that he resided within the territory of Armenia by the virtue of the fact that 1989 declaration, Miatun Declaration, had a legal validity within the Armenian legal system. So again, we need to make sure that that issue is not swept under the carpet, that it is discussed. And we should also understand that, yes, it is a difficult problem because it's not just a legal problem, it's also a political problem. And we need to make sure that that problem is discussed openly, sensitively, between Armenian and Azerbaijani leaders, diplomats, civil society, constructively. We need to basically understand that this is not an artificial problem. We do have a genuine concern. Regarding what also mentioned, that recently Armenian officials have also stated that Azerbaijani constitution has a territorial claim against Armenia. Let me also refer to that. And I will give a quote from, whenever that argument is voiced, including by Prime Minister Pashinyan, he refers to the Constitutional Act of Azerbaijani Republic, dated 18 October 1991. I will read a very short excerpt from that Constitutional Act. It says that the Supreme Council of the Republic of Azerbaijan, based on the Declaration of Independence adopted by the Azerbaijani National Council on May 28, 1918, adhering to the democratic principles and traditions of the Republic of Azerbaijan, and guided by the Declaration on the Restoration of State Independence adopted by the Supreme Council of Azerbaijani Republic on August 30, 1991, adopts this Constitutional Act. So it basically says that the Declaration of Independence of Azerbaijan is guided by 30 August 1991 Declaration on the Restoration of State Independence. The reference to 1918 Azerbaijan Democratic Republic is made only in the context of, quote, adhering to the democratic principles and traditions of the Republic of Azerbaijan. So that's very important. We are not referring to a 1918 Republic, just like Armenia is referring to 1918 Republic in their constitution. We never had problems with that reference. Azerbaijani side never said that the very reference of Armenian constitution to 1918 equals territorial claims against Azerbaijan, because we understand that that's not the case. That's a reference. The reference to 1918 republics in both Armenian and Azerbaijani constitutions is merely an expression of legal continuity between the two, between the independent republic today and the 1918 tradition. But specifically, Azerbaijan says that its independence was declared guided by the 1991 early decision on Declaration of Independence. So unlike Armenian side, we do not have any references to their territory, while in Armenian constitution, there's a clear reference to Nagorno-Karabakh. There's a clear reference to Declaration of Independence, which refers to the former Nagorno-Karabakh territory.
By the way,
so that's a very different situation from,
by the way,
Armenia.
Boris does not believe that there is a territorial claim ingrained in the Azerbaijani constitutional system against Armenia. He simply believes that neither constitution.
No, I'm not saying that that's Boris. I'm not referring to Boris in my response. It's not a response to Boris. It's just an attempt to really clarify.
We're talking about the equivalence that Armenia wants to establish between the two constitutions there. There's no miatsum equivalence in Azerbaijani constitution. That's exactly the point that you mentioned. This is very interesting discussion. Some people may think that it's very time consuming. Some people may think so that we need to move forward. We should simply leave it behind. But there are certain sensibilities. Azerbaijan does not trust Armenia, and Azerbaijan believes there is a 3-decade legacy of the Armenian government, not the current government, but legacy of the state, wherein everything has been done to prove that Karabakh has never been part of Azerbaijani state. And we also remember the reservations made to the Almaty declaration, which were made actually in early 1992. And Armenian side is saying that that might have been the case, but now we are very clear. There is no obstacle, and Prime Minister saying that. So we understand the ongoing debate, which probably will assume a more definable shape and leading to resolution and a peace deal at some point soon. Boris, I would like to ask you about, although we're not discussing internal Armenian affairs here, of course, but to what extent Prime Minister Pashinyan's willingness to sign a peace deal with Azerbaijan is particularly augmented with his internal predicament? Because we know that internally the circumstances there are a bit complex. Although his party, the Civil Contract Party, retains a parliamentary majority, we also know that the two former civil contracts MPs, members of the ruling party, are preparing a motion of no confidence. We do not believe that something will come out of it. We remember those two members of the Civil Contract Party. But the question is, how heavily does this political predicament weigh on the Prime Minister's mind, and how might it affect his approach to the peace process?
I would say that there are three circumstances that are equally important, or at least close to equally important. One is, of course, a very pragmatic agenda of the ruling party. They need to win elections next year, and so they need to introduce to the public certain results of their political line. And peace treaty would be that very convincing example, which will allow people maybe to go and vote for a civil. But of course, Pashinyan is eager to stay in power for many years ahead. And there is no constitutional limits for being prime minister, contrary to the limits for the presidency. And of course, he will need to introduce new practical achievements in the following years. And for this, for the development of the country, we really need peace and cooperation in the region. So I don't see real contradictions between very pragmatic tasks and more let's say, substantial issues. And another very, I would say, concrete and peculiar issue is that Armenia needs new constitution. And we need constitutional reform. But when all the process of constitutional reform is perceived by the public as a prerequisite put by Azerbaijan, then it spoils a lot the whole important process in our country. I don't say that there should not be changes in the preamble of the Constitution of Armenia, or preamble at all could be just taken off from the document. All this is possible, and probably these are the best solutions. But we should not connect with this neither Armenian-Azerbaijani relations nor the need of adopting new constitution. because we have many other challenges and many other problems with this constitution, and we have to focus on them rather on, as I mentioned several times, artificial issues. And my appeal to Azerbaijani experts is not to use false arguments and false narratives or false stereotypes. And Robert Kocharian was registered as candidate for presidency in 1998, not as resident of Nagorno-Karabakh. He introduced to the Central Electoral Commission a certificate that he has residence census as resident of Yerevan. We might say that this was a falsified document, or indeed he was spending more than 50% of his time in Yerevan, and then he is considered as a person that lives in the Republic of Armenia. But in fact, the reason for his registration as a candidate was this certificate, not any provision of the Constitution. And if in 1998 elections or following 2003 elections, Nagorno-Karabakh would be considered as part of Armenia, then polling station would be established in Nagorno-Karabakh. But there were no polling station in Nagorno-Karabakh. And if Nagorno-Karabakh was part of Armenia, then these elections and many laws that are adopted in Armenia are now anti-constitutional, would be recognized as anti-constitutional. You have to understand that.
Just want to clarify, Boris, from the perspective of Armenian political leadership, let's imagine we are back in late 90s, we are in Armenia, in Yerevan, and sort of the policymakers looking at that territory, which is internationally recognized as part of Azerbaijan, that mountain is part of Karabakh. It is not part of Armenia, but it's not part of Azerbaijan either from their perspective. It's not an independent state either. What is it in the legal mindset of Armenia?
It was for many years an issue for negotiations. And currently negotiations came to the end that Armenia is recognizing Azerbaijani territorial integrity, including Nagorno-Karabakh.
True. And back then that wasn't the case. And it was the result of the application of force in 2020 and so forth. And that's the reason why Azerbaijan is so skeptical.
Including that, many.
That's it. Because I remember Prime Minister Pashinyan saying something quite extraordinary. He said that before 2020 or before October 2022, I can't remember exactly the two dates, I was reading Almaty Declaration in one way, and after that date, I'm reading it in a different way. You know, this elasticity, this maneuverability gave rise to the assumption that everything it could be potentially coming out from the Armenian side.
Yeah, this is why that I'm constantly in disagreement with the official position.
Yes, indeed. Allow me to reiterate here is that both of you're not government officials, you don't represent the respective governments, you are independent policy analysts, and your opinions matter a great deal for us in terms of forming our own opinion, and I reiterate my thanks for that. Tabi, maybe last question to you. Quite often Western policymakers, even Turkish colleagues, are saying that Pashinyan is probably the most pragmatic, most rational Armenian prime minister, Armenian leader. If he is somewhat forced out of power in one way or another, which is Armenia's internal affair, of course, it's not Azerbaijan's affair, but still it will be very difficult to attain a deal with a new post-Pashinyan Armenia, and therefore do not exacerbate his circumstances. Does it really matter from Azerbaijan's perspective which person in charge, who is in charge of Armenia when we sign a deal with that country?
I should say that Pashinyan is very pragmatic now. After the end, he became pragmatic starting from 2022. Let's not forget that. Before 2022, and even before 2020, Second Karabakh War, he was very radical. Some would say, many Armenian even analysts would agree. I don't know if Boris would agree with that assessment, but many Armenians even would agree that Pashinyan was even more unequivocal and in his radical views concerning Miatsum and concerning unification, annexation of Karabakh to Armenia than than his predecessors. He abandoned practically this ambiguity in the statements of Armenian leaders that was a characteristic trait of Armenian political discourse under Robert Kocharian and Sarkisyan, and he was very unequivocally talking about unification of annexation of Karabakh with Armenia before the Second Karabakh War. He became much more pragmatic as a result of the new status quo that emerged in the region following the war. And also starting from 2022, he increasingly understood that the current ambiguity that is this ambiguous position of Armenia concerning the recognition of territorial integrity of Azerbaijan would, in the long run, create problems for Armenia itself. And that's why he started this political narrative about real Armenia versus historical, mythical Armenia. And I think that this conversation that we're discussing, this discussion around the constitutional amendments in Armenia, is also part of this discussion of real Armenia versus this retrograde concept of historical Armenia. Of course, we want to make sure that, we do appreciate the transformation in Pashinyan's discourse, in his views. And I think that many Azerbaijanis do genuinely appreciate the way he talks sometimes to Armenian society. Some of the things that he's saying to Armenian society have never been said before. And I think that's very important. And I personally, I don't know about many, like the majority of Azerbaijanis, but I do personally appreciate his attempts to infuse the Armenian public with this new discourse on what kind of Armenia they want to see in the future for the generations to come. And from that perspective, of course, I think that, maybe Azerbaijan would be interested to make sure that Pashinyan is successful at the end in his efforts to make the narrative of real Armenia a dominant narrative in the Armenian political sphere. Of course, we will understand that, in the society, there will always be fringe opinions in the future. Every society, and even Azerbaijani society, is not immune to these fringe opinions of greater Armenia, greater Azerbaijan, greater Hungary. Every country has its greater version in the fringes of the political discourse. But that discourse, the difference is that discourse in today's Armenia is a political mainstream, and that's a problem.
Thank you, Tabii.
And that's what Pashinyan is trying to achieve.
We're running out of time. I just would like to pay my tribute to both of you. Thank you very much for this meaningful conversation. Boris Novosadian, political analyst from Yerevan, and Tabii Biseynov, independent researcher from Baku, Azerbaijan. Thank you very much for this very, very interesting and somewhat revealing conversation. I reiterate my profound thanks. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you. Well, the fact that President Aliyev and Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan continue to seize opportunities to speak face-to-face may in itself be a modest source of optimism. In one sense, the parties continue to agree to disagree in the long tradition of protracted negotiation. And yet one cannot help but observe that emerging contours of a future concurrence are actually there, and they are slowly, incrementally beginning to take shape. If diplomacy is indeed the art of the possible, then building peace between these two nations will demand yet more perseverance. You have been watching Caucasus Now, and see you very soon indeed.